Workshop, call the meeting in order. Jenny, if you take the roll.
Councilmember Thorson?
Here.
Councilmember Peterson? Here. Councilmember Wong? Here. Councilmember Cole?
Here.
Mayor Furlong?
Here, quorum is present. Motion to adopt the agenda
So moved.
by Councilmember Peterson,
Second.
second by Councilmember Cole. Any discussion? Not all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We got two topics, it looks like. First one is American Rescue Plan, and the second one is the Silver Lake Aerator Maintenance Responsibilities. Doesn't sound good. So we'll go ahead and, Brian, if you want to go ahead and introduce or talk about American Plan. Kind of figured that.
Turn it over to Kyle. He's going to speak on the plan and also some options that we have for spending money for that. But he's the guy to talk to.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yeah, so for today, this first,
Kyle, can I stall you for 2 seconds here?
yeah, sure.
Only the workshop, so.
Yeah, I think so.
Only the workshop.
Gonna sing us a tune or?
No, I don't
Okay.
sing.
Yeah, sing, dance, any.
I don't really have any talents other than accounting. Math isn't accounting. That's different. We use calculators, abacuses.
Right.
A calculator that happens to be a phone. How about that?
Two truths and a lie. How do you want to? Two truths and a lie. I've been in a tornado, a hurricane, and an earthquake.
Hurricane.
The lie's the tornado.
Oh.
I lived in California for 6 years when the Northridge earthquake hit, and then I was in Florida when every season we got a hurricane or two that would come through. What year was that? 90s. In the 90s.
Now, where's some real wood here? Now you know, because you live locally here, that you just jinxed.
Right?
Tornado is right around the corner.
I'm knocking on wood too.
Brian would like that.
Okay.
So, Mayor and Council, so for staff today is requesting the approval for us to submit to the state of Minnesota to receive the first half payment of these state and local fiscal recovery funds. So we are listed as a non-entitlement unit, so our portion of the funding goes to the state of Minnesota, and then we request it from them.
Can you explain the non-entitlement? Is that based on population, or is that,
I can't fully explain it. I do know it has something to do with population and the census and that type, and just federal funding, how that's been dispersed in the past.
okay.
So, yeah, as a non-entitlement unit, we will submit to the state of Minnesota with your approval, and we'd get the first half of the approximately 1.3 million. And the entire amount needs to be not spent, but at least contracted by December 31st, 2024. So there is time.
We have time. We have
Yeah.
lots of time to,
Exactly, to figure out exactly where we want to use it. And I attached that compliance guide, which kind of, it's not the in-depth U.S. Treasury legalese document, but it kind of just highlights some of the bigger items. And yeah, I think further on, once we start looking, I think we have the CIP coming in a couple weeks. We could start to look at where we want to, in the budget, where we kind of want to put this money towards. But yeah, so, yeah, we're just requesting that funding, and if you guys have any questions on how that submission's done, or,
So this is the easy part,
yeah.
get the money in.
And it's similar to the coronavirus relief funding, where we submitted to the state for that. It's very similar. No, it's. Exactly. We just need to have like a federal DUNS number, SAM's registration, bunch of identifying numbers.
Okay.
So they're ensuring right people get it.
So we have a lot of time. You can talk even more about it if you want.
Yeah, I saw that. There wasn't. So, I mean, I think the big things on it, and it's not up to me.
Or I could take another break if you.
Okay. I think the big highlight items, and I think I wrote the 4 overarching eligibility, and the big one, just respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency or its negative economic impact. Respond to workers performing essential work. And then to the extent of reduction in revenue, claim that reduction. And then another big one is to make necessary investments in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure. And yeah, there's plenty of opportunity, ways to go on this. And I think we can present it to you, and then you would decide which route or routes.
Sure. From what I hear is you don't want to create something that produces a lot of expenses for the city. So you don't want to create a new ice arena or something,
Well, this is a one-time dollar amount, and if, I would think, the ice arena, you may be paying for that for 30 years.
Any questions for Kyle?
No, I think it just, once, obviously we get the money, then we can talk about ways that we need to use it and spend it. And to me, that the necessary investment in water and sewer is probably a big one that we obviously need to continue to look at with our capital improvement plan, so that probably can take up a large chunk of this money.
And with regards to the federal single audit, it's if you have expenditures in the year of over 750,000. So the total we'll be getting this year is 650, but if we hold it and spend it all at once in 1 year, it's when we spend it, not when we receive the cash.
The audit,
For the single audit.
the single
yeah,
audit.
the federal audit.
Got it. Interesting. Have you in touch with other cities, what they're going to do with it at all, or what's the buzz out there
It's so far out that everyone just
trying to figure
wants to
out?
get it right. And, yeah, there's no jump to it, just to spend it right away. You're not even gonna have half of it for another year.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, so just what I'm hearing is that a lot of cities are considering, not a lot of decisions made yet, but considering it for utility improvements within their cities, knowing that it's, I guess, I might call it free money, right? And so to help supplement their capital improvement plans or shore up, other enterprise funded utility kind of things like sewer, water, surface water. So that's just what we're hearing right now.
So Public Works is going to get most of it? Thank you, Morgan.
Is there an opportunity to have, I guess, maybe what is the way in which you're determining needs for and uses for this money as you go through this process that you'll share with us?
So, I mean, I think, and I don't want to speak for Brian on this, but we'll present you with ideas to use it for, and it's up to you how you'd like to use it. And if something in the material we've, provided you're interested in, I mean, it's up to you.
All of us, not just you.
Right. Yeah, I'm just,
I did a scan when I said
yeah.
that.
Well, I'm also trying to understand how are you as
Lot of
staff
pressure
kind
on you,
of
Lisa.
deciding which are your priorities to propose to us and what information are you using? Yep.
I can provide just a little bit of background in terms of, capital improvement planning, what we've done in the past and what we're working on right now. Staff is working on for, we haven't worked out all the details, but I believe at least a workshop in 2 weeks here would be, again, some draft ideas, some potential priorities. Too soon for staff to make, a really strong recommendation, but give some options that include some costs, and what infrastructure are we talking about, again, to kind of further that discussion between staff and the city council, which would help inform budgets. How can some of these grant funds be, put to purpose in the coming years, and a potential time frame. I mean, the capital improvement planning process is not intended to be written on a stone tablet, so even if formally adopted by city council, it can be fluid and it can be reordered and reprioritized. But we use things like review of existing pavement conditions, real-world data that Public Works has been tracking in terms of where in the city water main breaks have been occurring, how old are the pipes, what material the pipes are, that sort of thing. So that's what we kind of use to formulate a general recommendation in terms of what could be, and then truthfully, after conversations with the city council and where the priorities lie from your all standpoints, then that would inform maybe a more formal version that would be adopted at a later date. But again, that can fold in even before adoption to budget discussions.
And this kind of goes along with the utility rate study we discussed, I believe, a couple council meetings ago.
Good. I think we need a chair there for the workshop, just have you sit down and
Stool, a big tall stool, or?
stool, yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Morgan. We've had some.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, we've had some discussion about the need for an additional water tower or, revamping and tearing down and building a bigger existing tower. I mean, this obviously seems like that would fall into that category when it's talking about investment in water. Is that correct? That would be a,
Councilmember Thorson, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, absolutely. So we do have a completed study that has not been received by the council yet, and so, depending on staff's evaluation of room on agendas and that sort of thing, I mean, it could be brought forward at a workshop just for general review and discussion as soon as the next meeting, or shortly thereafter. But yeah, the documented need from a storage standpoint, for water storage, I mean, that's been out there for several decades, actually, in terms of a known deficiency. Now, I think it's important for the council and the public to understand that it's a deficiency from a standard standpoint in terms of how much storage a community should have. It does not mean we're going to run out of water. And that's why we've, our pumping capacity out of our wells is enough that we're able to keep up with demand. And that's good for North St. Paul. Not every community is like that. There are several growing communities that, at least certainly this summer, have had to enact pretty serious watering bans and/or conservation measures that we so far have, we've been fortunate enough to not have to, even with our storage deficiency. But the deficiency is there for a very real reason, knowing that sometimes there's peak demands, or extreme, emergency fire events, or you could have a tower go down in a tornado or something like that, right? And so that's, it has been a long-term goal identified in comprehensive planning efforts to add more storage to what we have currently, and staff does have that plan, which has some definite alternatives and options to consider. Certainly not an inexpensive thing to invest in a new water tower. But there's several options with a recommended option that we can review at a future meeting here shortly.
And we also have to look at putting together a plan for surface water possibility with the White Bear Lake lawsuit.
Yes.
So that's another, I mean, if you go to surface water, then we don't need the towers.
Well, you may or may not. I mean,
Right.
so there are communities that use St. Paul Regional Water, which the majority of their water source is surface water, and that has come up and been discussed as an option for North St. Paul to convert from its existing groundwater sourced water distribution system to connect to the St. Paul Regional Water System, which basically surrounds us on three sides. The city of Maplewood uses St. Paul Regional Water. But now, the city of Maplewood still has water towers and needs to maintain infrastructure. It all just depends on the agreement, community to community, between the city and St. Paul Regional Water as kind of a regional water distribution utility, if you will. And my understanding is that St. Paul Regional Water right now is not interested in buying or acquiring cities' infrastructure, meaning all of a sudden it would take over water towers and the aging pipes in the ground. Their main focus is sale of water at a wholesale level to cities, and then cities are still needing to not only pay their rates, but also charge their users for enough to cover the ongoing maintenance and repair needs for its system, which might include, a new water tower to get up to standards in terms of storage, right? So I guess I would represent to the council at this time, as far as I'm understanding, is that if there is a future surface water conversion for North St. Paul to consider, that may not preclude the need to still invest in additional storage and/or other investment in its water distribution system.
It's kind of an unknown right now.
It is. But again, based on the last few adoptions or conversions, if you will, that I'm aware of, where cities have converted to St. Paul Regional Water, it's more of a wholesale arrangement where they're supplying the water, but we are still responsible for the distribution system to the end users.
We might be forced to go to surface water. I mean, I don't know where that's going to go, but I mean, that's kind of the lawsuit right now is.
Right.
If we were forced to go into it, we got to put a plan together.
And
if
I know
we were
this,
to
and
use
I
it.
know the city attorney is following that very closely, and I guess, sharing the information with respect to, what the study has shown, or, what options are available. That doesn't mean that the city needs to move forward at this time. It simply, puts it out on the table. So here's what was looked at. It's been completed for some time. It just, there hasn't been an appropriate placeholder, I guess, from an agenda standpoint to bring it forth to city council. So that, we'll talk about it at a staff level. We certainly are available to bring it, as soon as next meeting or whenever is the appropriate time, you will see that information.
Does that also include, projected supply and demand as we expand, housing and all over the city? That does.
Yeah, so the Met Council approved growth projections, if you will, which they're projections,
Right.
but they are intended to satisfy our comp plan, which is out through 2040, and which does include the recent areas of redevelopment. So yes, the study does include that number from a demand standpoint.
Thank you.
Morgan, I'm curious, so that 2040 plan, the Met Council, in the way the numbers are right now with the total expansion of, I think every city's experiencing this huge expansion sooner than what was expected from the Met Council. I don't know, has that been talked about? Is that something?
So when
that
your
is a-
engineer
is that
starts
a-
talking like
is that a
he's
real
a
thing
planner,
that's happening?
you're in danger territory there. But to be honest, we just finished our comp plan update effort. It's only been a
Right.
couple of years since, or maybe not even a couple of years since it was approved or adopted by the Met Council. And every city in the metropolitan area is working off of the projections, approved projections that we are given regionally by the Met Council, right? And with knowledge, institutional knowledge of what's happening in our own communities, and maybe some guidance in terms of what the city council or what the planning commission wants to see as we kind of work through that process. But to your point, those are only projections about what could happen, and they change all the time. I think the pandemic threw a huge wrench in what a lot of people thought was going to happen. The real estate market is totally different right now than it was 2 years ago, and I think that's unexpected. And when all cities in the metropolitan area were kind of kicking off their comprehensive plan update a couple of years ago, everything we were hearing about in the news, and I think from the Met Council too, and some press releases, was that there was going to be this pullback from the suburbs into kind of more the core area, if you want, like maybe inner ring suburbs, but mostly like Minneapolis, St. Paul. That was the thought. And what I've heard is that is definitely not happening right now. But I don't know if anybody can say what is happening, because it takes time to kind of study the trends and crunch the numbers. And it'll be interesting to see again post-pandemic, because what the Met Council or other agencies are saying trends will be, because a lot of things like traffic engineering projections and broadband use, a lot of stuff is just totally out the window. You can't use any data or information from 2020 because it was so impacted or affected by change in use and change in work habits and who's working from home or not, so that there's a lot of factors at play. And I think it'll be very interesting to see in the next 5 years what we're hearing in terms of trends and changes in development. The good news, I think, for our community in North St. Paul is that from what we're hearing from our development partners or the builders or the folks that are involved in the developments that are going on right now, is that the market is strong and they're very optimistic, right? And so I think that a lot of the activity that you're seeing right now should be well received from a market standpoint, hopefully both residential and commercial, but that's my understanding right now.
Right. It's happened a lot sooner than later.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Good. How about electric? Demand.
For our electric, we saw a reduction in demand a little bit for commercial, but we're a little unique because we are majority residential in the city. So we don't have that high commercial demand like you see in bigger cities where they have that. We have only a handful of large commercial, and when you get to the bigger cities, they have many of them, and then they have industrial on top of that. So we just don't have that, and we don't get that demand from that heavy load. So what we did see was a small reduction in the business consumption and demand, but we saw a small increase from people working out of their homes and that load. So it pretty close to evened out as far as the electric was concerned.
All right. Silver Lake Aerator?
So that's going to be turned over to Morgan. They had a meeting.
Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Frandl. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So this next item is something that staff wanted to bring to your attention just for discussion purposes and get your reaction and consensus. It goes back at least 2 years that I'm aware of. At one point, we did host at the city when Craig Waldron was the city manager. We hosted a meeting that included DNR and Maplewood and Oakdale and Valley Branch Watershed District, all interested and Ramsey County, all interested stakeholders, I guess, if you will, in the Silver Lake area. And Valley Branch Watershed District, their district encompasses pretty tightly just around Silver Lake. The majority of the city is regulated from a watershed district standpoint under a different district, Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District, but that corner of North St. Paul is under the jurisdiction of Valley Branch. And so at that time, it was brought up by Ramsey County, hey, we have been operating this aerator, which is installed on the north side of Silver Lake for some time. At that time, they also were responsible for operation of the weir, which controls the lake level. So that's like the outlet to Silver Lake. which has been fairly contentious over the years in terms of, what is the appropriate and right level for Silver Lake. That's a whole separate discussion, so that we could have a meeting unto itself on that topic. But at that time, or since that time, the ownership and maintenance of the weir, because Ramsey County is saying, hey, we're kind of not the right agency to do these things. They just kind of brought it up at that point a couple of years ago. So since then, the weir has been transferred to Valley Branch Watershed District, which is fairly appropriate that they're in charge of that. And just for educational purposes, lake levels are regulated by the DNR, so you can't just simply change a lake level. It's not a simple process, and that was part of the discussion that we had with everybody at the table at that time, so that, everybody understood that. The city can't raise or lower the lake level. It's a regulated thing. But then there have been ongoing discussions off and on again involving the city of Maplewood, who owns Joy Park, and that is Maplewood on that side of the lake. Ramsey County, again, who's still operating this aerator, and North St. Paul, and then the Watershed District. And more recently, I would say in the last 6 months, we've gotten to the point where different agencies have kind of gotten closer to defining what their belief was and what they felt strongly their role should be in the arrangement. Ramsey County is saying that, again, we're not the right agency. We're really not in the business of water quality or operating things like aerators, which is understandable. The Watershed District has said, well, we really don't have the budget for that. Right now, we're willing to contribute and be a partner, but we don't know if we have the staff and or budget to be able to take over full operations, because there's some annual things that need to happen. The aerator needs to be put in and pulled out, and some signs need to be placed from a regulatory standpoint for thin ice, that sort of thing. And Maplewood has defined their position along the lines of they have one other aerator in town that is actually, I think, owned and operated or maintained by the other watershed district, Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District, through agreement with them. But in this particular instance, with their internal discussions, they did not have the resources or the ability, again, to kind of take over full ownership and maintenance responsibilities for the aerator. So then that left the city of North St. Paul, who, again, in discussions, I think it was recognized that the majority of the public that use and enjoy Silver Lake and appreciate the benefits of diverse aquatic wildlife, which the aerator does help promote in terms of making sure that we don't have a full-depth winter fish kill event, which has happened as before my time, but my understanding is that it's happened a couple times in Silver Lake, and that can be catastrophic to
The fish.
the fish, certainly. But if you have, some of the rough fish, or maybe fish that can kind of just dig themselves in the bottom of the lake, but all the game fish, for example, the desirable species die off, then you wind up with some water quality issues, just in terms of the balance of the wildlife. That's not my area of expertise, but it's fairly well documented that by having these things like the aerators, and we also have one in Casey Lake for the exact same reasons, that there's one in Silver Lake as well too. But it's a benefit from a water quality standpoint, from a wildlife habitat standpoint. And so having, I guess, the most area around the lake and the most activity around the lake, past city manager had mentioned that, the city of North St. Paul would be interested in considering being responsible for the, maintenance of said aerator and pump and that sort of thing, similar to what we do in Casey Lake. If some of the other agencies will help, contribute and partner on some of the funding. So Ramsey County then put together this document, which is in your packet, which is basically just an understanding of a potential scenario that involves both cities and Valley Branch Watershed District, and allows Ramsey County to transition from the ownership and maintenance body to more of a available for, assistance and for advice should Public Works, for example, if North St. Paul takes it on, needs some help because they've got all of the institutional knowledge on it. Some of the highlights in there is that, and I don't know if it's truly defined in the document, but I've got it documented in emails. Both Valley Branch Watershed District and Maplewood, at least in terms of ongoing conversations, not formalized yet in an agreement that would need to be drafted amongst all three agencies. But they're willing to split all of the electricity costs so that the city of North St. Paul wouldn't have to pay any electricity. I think it's in there, but I believe the electrical estimate is between $5,000 and $10,000 a year or something like that, right? So we would get the electric bill, and we would need to invoice both of those agencies. And their one request is, hey, since we don't know exactly what the energy bill is, can we agree on a number that's the same every year that each agency can just budget, and then we send them an invoice, I don't know, January 1st or something, and then they pay us that presumed 50-50 split, which should get close. It's not exact down to the dime and the nickel, but is just a little bit easier from a budgeting standpoint and invoicing standpoint. And if we need to revisit that number, if electric rates go up, or if we feel like we're upside down, since we would be the lead agency, I think, certainly understandable if we want to modify that or amend the agreement to increase whatever number we agree at. Another item is that they have pointed out that the pump and the, I forget the terminology, I don't have it in front of me, but the pump and the aerator, I guess if you will, were both, the baffle, thank you, were both recently rehabilitated or rebuilt, within the last few years. The next major maintenance on those two items is in the packet item, and I believe it's, not expected until 2030 or something like that, right? So we're not getting something that is, in terms of, I guess I look at this as like a jurisdictional transfer. So similar to if a city takes over a county road, there's usually some discussion of what quality is the road in. And, if we're getting an old road, well, we'd take the road over, but we want a whole bunch of money from you guys to basically get it up to our standards, right? So we're not in that situation here. So it's a relatively new, from a rehabilitation and life cycle standpoint, according to the information from Ramsey County, transfer. So there's no immediate bills that are anticipated in terms of major maintenance. The other item with major maintenance is that historically, and I think this is the same with our setup in Casey Lake, is that if and when we do need a full replacement, that the DNR will respond to a request for funds to be able to pay for in full for those items, if the pump needs to be completely replaced or whatever. That's what Ramsey County has done in the past, and they're pointing that out to us so that, we know, at least to the extent that the DNR continues to have funds available for those types of things to local agencies, that should be at least a generally planned on funding source for that next point, 2030 or whenever we need to replace one of those things if we were to take this on. And other than that, again, it's a dedication of some amount of time and budget line item for Public Works. We don't have an exact number, but I think they had some estimated, expenses in terms of regular ongoing maintenance that was in the few thousands of dollars. Not overly significant, but certainly something that should be considered in terms of available resources. It does require access, which I think would need to be defined in the agreement, right? So City of North St. Paul staff would be doing something in the city of Maplewood, in a city of Maplewood Park. And so that would need to be defined as well, too. So with all those things together, I think what staff is wanting to put out there for council consideration and discussion, and certainly available to answer any questions that you might have, what might define our staff's next steps in terms of engagement with these parties? Is this something that the city of North St. Paul is interested in? Is it something that the city, subject to certainly budget discussions and how this might fold into the budget, But at this time, we have a general agreement of what could happen and would need to be formalized in an agreement to probably be drafted by our city attorney because we would be the lead agency for consideration by those governmental agencies. But the option is there to certainly say, no, thanks, but no thanks. I mean, there's nothing forcing the city to take this on. This is an ask by Ramsey County, knowing that there is a public benefit and a environmental benefit. They have said that they will likely phase out their operation of this sort of thing just because it doesn't necessarily fit within their program. And they were careful to point out to me, and I'll represent this full disclosure to the city council and anyone in the public that's paying attention to, that is not a threat. They have just said, listen, this is the reality. We're not really set up to continue to do this long term. We'd like to see everybody kind of reach some sort of agreement. They are actually proposing to give us a one-time lump sum payment of $10,000 to cover what they think is at least 2 years of initial ongoing, ownership and maintenance costs to help us make that transition. One option that we might have based on your discussion or your feeling is we could certainly go back and say, how about a little bit more than 10? In exchange for the fact that we are taking this over, right? That we would be the main party responsible for maintaining this long-term, and not Maplewood and not the watershed district, but also knowing that when there are questions and concerns about water quality, all of you know whose phone rings first. It's going to be City Hall, and what is Councilmember Cole doing about this? But that's the reality, and so I think that sometimes, depending on council consideration on this item, sometimes being in control is not a bad thing, even if that does take some resources and/or cash to keep it moving forward. So with that, I'll stand for any questions. And again, there's no action here. We don't have this on the regular meeting agenda tonight. Things would need to be drafted and figured out in further conversations, but that's kind of where we're at right now in the process.
Okay, so we already maintain one at Casey Lake. What does that entail? Is it, Ron, maybe you can give us a little input on regards to time and, that you spend on that and.
I can speak of that one in Silver Lake. I don't know how big it is, oh, sure. Oh, you put me on the spot. Oh, can I go right here?
Like I said, we need a chair up here.
Yeah, so the one at,
Kyle, you should have been sitting in that chair.
the one at Casey, it's on, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. The one at Casey, we put in and out each year. It's a permit that we have to apply for through the DNR. We got to apply for it each year. We have to wait till.
Would this be the same thing, Morgan? We'd have to apply?
Yes.
Okay.
And that one, we have to wait till the pond is ice covered before we can go put it in. We got to cut a hole with the chainsaw to put it in. And then we run a power cord out there. It gets hooked up, and it's basically just it's a pump. It's about 12 inches round. It's got a shaft on it that blows air into the lake. It runs until, or then we have to put all the thin ice signs around. They have to be monitored daily. We have to go check those daily. We had that hooked up to our SCADA system, so if that goes off, that we know that or something's up. Like last year, it went off one day while we were plowing, and we got a notification, and there's a guy down there ice fishing. He drilled a hole through the cord with his ice auger. So I don't know if there's any opportunity for that if we were going to monitor this. And like I said, I haven't seen how the Silver Lake one works, or how big of a pump or what it is, or how much of more of an operation it is. But with your permit, you're required to do daily, weekly checks to make sure all the signs stay up. We have to notify, I believe, what was it, Carrie? 2 different times, I think, by social media or something, a couple weeks before that is put out there. There's got to be signage put up at the boat landings or any places that you access the lake.
It sounds like those are DNR generated.
Yeah, I think what Morgan sent me, it said they'd provide the signage one time, and then after that, if they wore out or if they fall in the lake or whatever that might be, then it would be on us to replace those and put them on. So, like I said, I don't know what it's gonna be involved with that aerator as far as dealing with it and the maintenance. It said, you know, the life of the aerator is about 25 years. It sounds like you gotta stick about $1,000 to $5,000 a year through the course of that time into maintenance on it. So, I said, I'm not really sure what it all would involve, but
And I heard too that there's rock on the bottom or something, so it doesn't create a hole or has to be spread out.
Yeah, that was mentioned specifically in the document. To Ron's point, and it's a great one, you know, before we enter into an agreement, I think we need to have the maintenance staff from Ramsey County and maintenance staff from the city meet out there, take a look at what we're getting ourselves into. I mean, it shouldn't be significantly different than Casey Lake. It might be bigger, but it's generally the same operation. They did say that the stone, I think it was referred to as riprap. There's some riprap that needs to be placed or moved or checked on to make sure, because that can move over time through, you know, ice in and ice out, that sort of thing. But really, I mean, I believe the most labor-intensive thing over the course of, you know, the season is just the frequency of the checks and drive-by and, you know, and if we can get this new one tied in with our SCADA system so that we get, you know, notifications if it goes down or something like that, I think that's something that we would want to look into. And in fact, that might be justification for asking for some more money as well, too, if that's going to significantly aid our staff to be able to, you know, keep eyes on it to the requirement of the DNR, because that's, I think the permit outlines, if you're going to operate an aerator, this is what you need to do.
So the quality of the lake, it affects the quality of the lake. It's getting better. And I'd say the last 10 years, maybe 15 years, the quality of the lake is better than what it used to be. Is that something that you may not need an aerator at some point then, or does it keep improving the lake by having the aerator in place?
I would say, not being an environmental scientist myself, but just in terms of my experience with these sorts of things, it's not like operating a water treatment plant, right? I mean, the ecosystems of any lake or natural habitat are really complicated. And so if I had to guess, the aerator is simply, something like the aerator is simply going to augment or accentuate, from a positive standpoint, the water quality of the lake. I would suspect that it's not, you know, we're not going to get to a point where tests, water quality tests or whatever will show, oh, we can just turn off the aerator and get rid of it. Because again, it's kind of the main thing, the main benefit, I think, is looking to prevent that catastrophic fish kill event that, I mean, so Casey Lake was stocked 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, something like that, right? And then didn't we have a kill and they had to restock it?
That's a totally different lake. I mean, that's only 3 feet or.
Totally different and much probably easier to have happen. But again, I didn't know this, but from what I understand, that it has happened in Silver Lake. And it doesn't mean the whole lake freezes, but the fish kind of, you know, they winter in little certain parts. And if that part gets frozen deep and they all die, that can have a significant impact on the ecology, I guess.
Well, I know Maplewood, you know, they have a lot of land over there too, you know, so they do share the lake and they do share a lot of the use of the lake because that's their park. So a lot of their residents are actually probably using the lake more than maybe our residents just on the lake because they have more access into it and other people from outside the Maplewood area. So I would say, you know, Maplewood, you know, by giving us something is good. Getting more might be better.
I did ask if they wanted to, you know, navigate a friendly annexation with us and give the park to us. But there was no further discussion on that item.
Oh, okay.
Questions for Morgan?
Questions? No. Just exactly what you've brought up is what I've heard, that there isn't an idle threat. It's Ramsey County and the city of Maplewood have both elected to, over a period of time, walk away from what's there. kind of leaving North St. Paul on the hook to do something. So I think we're probably in the situation to be ahead of it and have some type of a negotiation lever to operate with. I had in my notes the same thing as Joy Park, North St. Paul. But no, because from what I understand, and it may be the riprap, there's a structure that the aerator goes in or on, and that's currently in Maplewood. It's not in North St. Paul. So the desire to have either North St. Paul annex that area or have some type of right to get in and out of there would definitely have to be negotiated up front.
And I believe Oakdale is part of that lake too, isn't it?
A small portion, I believe, actually where the weir is, frankly. The weir, it was always interesting that Ramsey County was taking care of the weir because it was in Washington County, and because there's a little bump out there. Oakdale has not really been at the table at all, to my recollection, at least in the last couple of years on these discussions. But to your point, Councilmember Cole, I think that the access rights, certainly, we can't be, if we're going to take care of this thing, we need to know that we can get to it, right? So I see this as kind of not a memorandum of understanding ultimately, but a formal joint powers agreement or JPA between either us and Valley Branch and then separately us and Maplewood, or maybe three organizations at the same time, depends on what the attorneys say. But rights of entry in some fashion, whether those are like dedicated easements, it's public property. I don't think we have to worry about them, being recorded against the property and running with the land, but at least formalized in the agreement in some fashion in terms of how North St. Paul has the ability to enter onto the property and do what needs to be done. And maybe it's just a blanket easement. Maybe we get rights to, be in the entire park. I don't know. But I think that would be something that we'd have to build in, the attorneys would need to look at.
So who's negotiating? Are you, Morgan, with them?
I've been at the table. Yeah, it was myself, City Manager Scott Dudek in the past, City Manager Craig Waldron originally when we first started these discussions, but it's all kind of come to the point where right now it was the right time to bring it back to council because we had kind of gotten to a point where everybody's saying, well, okay, let's see what our councils say, basically. So,
And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And to your point, Maplewood benefits from the use of the lake just about to the same level that I think North St. Paul does, and I would love to see a little bit more from them, from a stepping up standpoint, as opposed to just covering half of the electric bill.
I can bring
Good
that
luck.
back.
And to the point of, if we are liable for any remaining electrical costs, is there anything in the is it called the CIP, the Conservation Improvement Funds, or any funds that could be allocated to that's mandated to something like that?
Not that I'm aware of, but certainly check into that further. Actually, the power there, that's actually our service territory, but there's exceptions in the border survey territory for utilities across Minnesota. We actually serve some areas that belong to Excel, and then Excel serves some areas that actually belong to us, and it's just for the reason of the power lines that run up there. All of the power poles have to be changed out. We'd have to put an underbuild, we'd have to have their power on top and us on the bottom like we do from South Avenue going south along Highway 120. So it just didn't make any financial sense. So that's why we don't service that, even though it's our service territory.
So logistic-wise, is that probably the best spot in the lake to have it?
Probably, I think depth-wise, were you aware of that?
Now, that's a good question. I don't think that that's been asked or answered by anybody. It's been there since it was installed for whatever reason, and I don't know who determined that, the DNR or, Maplewood or Ramsey County. The infrastructure is there right now. So as you were mentioning, financial sense in terms of, why it's not NSP power right there. North St. Paul, not Northern States Power, sorry. But same thing would apply, right? It might be easier for us to, if we were to put it in and take it out, like, by the beach or something that was more accessible from our standpoint, but then we also might wind up incurring more expenses just to relocate that. And so if we do have rights to get up there, it's not that far away. You're still plowing streets not too far away. You're still maintaining things not too far away, right? So I think there hasn't been any discussion about moving it. That doesn't mean that we couldn't look at that or at least ask the question.
So Ron, if you request a snowmobile, I'll know what it's for. It's.
And
Councilmember Thorson. I know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I think personally that this is obviously a benefit to the lake. It improves the water quality, and it's, there was obviously discussion and thought put into this ahead of time to install it. And the fact now that Maplewood has just decided they don't want to deal with it, and Ramsey County doesn't want to deal with it, it seems to be a budgetary issue, and it's kind of odd that, it's in Maplewood. So it'd be kind of like if they just decided, well, we're not gonna pick up the trash in our park anymore, but the park is still ours. So North St. Paul, why don't you come in and pick it up, or maybe stop mowing the lawn? It just kind of seems odd that they would decide they're just not going to take on this maintenance issue anymore, even though it's theirs, it's on their property. So that's where I naturally would say, well, if it's a budgetary issue, why wouldn't they seriously consider just handing over the whole entire Joy Park to North St. Paul? Because it is kind of a weird landlocked thing. And if that's the bigger issue, that they're concerned about maintenance, well, why wouldn't they consider just handing that all over? And I think at that point, we look at it as an additional park feature and something that we would take on. But if that's just off the table, but I would, that would be naturally my first inclination is like, well, if this is a maintenance issue and you don't want to do it and it's a cost issue, then what, do you have other issues with Joy Park that you're not wanting to take care of? And, but yeah, I think we should certainly move ahead and look at leveraging ourselves to be, if we're gonna take this on, to get all these parties, if there's no long-term commitment, at least more of an initial, kick in up front, and then having our better understanding of everything, every maintenance item, and the potential costs. Because, maybe they know something, like there's some big maintenance thing that they just don't want to deal with, and that's why they're just trying to just get rid of it and pass it off now. I would hope that wouldn't be the case, but we have to do our due diligence and look into that. But it just seems odd that this one maintenance item thing they just want to divulge themselves of versus other areas of that park.
I agree. I think we have to do a lot more checking and see exactly how it works, what it is, and what it entails, because I really don't know, other than, what you guys have in front of you. So.
I'm assuming they did these years ago. North St. Paul wasn't the only one that they put in. They probably put in numerous aerators throughout the city or watershed or Valley Branch or whatever, just to, for that purpose, for the winter, because I'm sure all these other lakes around here have the same problem that Silver Lake has. I don't know about, our neighbors to the east. There's quite a few lakes over there, and I'm assuming they must have the same issues that we have with winter kill and stuff like that. So it's probably something they added years ago, and now it's an expense,
And I have to believe Ramsey County when they say this is the only one that they do or that they have, and I think that might be because Joy Park, if I'm correct on this, before my time, but I think it was a county park originally, and it was given to Maplewood at some point.
So they got it freed, so we should just be passed on, keep passing it on.
Am I wrong on that? And folks that have been in the city for a long time, that it was a county park? Okay. That's my understanding. So, and it's, within the municipal boundary of Maplewood. Is that right, Candy?
This goes back a long way when my father was a Ramsey County Commissioner, and he tried to get that park so much. I mean, he worked on it for 26 years, and it was always no, because you know, with the location.
Yeah.
There were neighbors up there that wanted to annex at one time, I mean, you know, more recently, but I don't think it was a county park. I just
Okay.
thought it was Joy Park, and Maplewood owned that property.
Okay. Well, that is,
Up there back in the day.
I think what I'm hearing from the council is that you're okay continuing discussions. I think, you know, even before we start getting into drafting of agreements, we can arrange a meeting between county public works staff and North St. Paul Public Works staff, and maybe we have Maplewood Public Works staff out there too for an honest discussion about what the heck they do other than this, but, you know, their maintenance activities in the park. And potentially continue to leverage our potential role as lead agency for additional monies from Ramsey County and potentially Maplewood. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Yep.
I think that's fair. So I would say staff's got adequate direction at this point to keep moving forward.
Okay. I don't know if we have any other items. Brian, do you have any other items?
Those are the only 2 items on the docket?
Okay. I don't know if I want to, Ray, if you don't mind, I mean, I saw you walk in and you're kind of the new role, and I think the council may like to hear of what's going on over at the police department. Maybe just give me a little update, and if you guys, as a council doesn't mind, we'll throw Ray in here real quick, and we get plenty of time here, and. So we do have information? What was it?
1956, the county, Ramsey County acquired it.
Oh,
Acquired the park, and then gave it to Maplewood.
who'd they acquire from?
That is a great question. I was just looking on their website, and on Maplewood's website, it talks about the history of Joy Park, and it just says that Ramsey.
And there's a name behind the Joy,
Yeah,
and I don't know what that is.
Joel?
There was a mansion or a big house that they owned all that property, the Joy family.
Yeah, Joy family, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a big article.
They must have acquired it from the Joy family,
Yeah.
is my guess. Interesting. Well, we made it through 4th of July, and
We did.
there was no fireworks that were let off in North St. Paul?
We did have quite a few fireworks. We had one criminal damage incident that occurred at Casey Lake. It seemed like there were several parties that had cookouts and their family festivities going on about there. And sometime around the overnight hours, officers made patrol during their shift, and when they got there, there was some trash scattered throughout the park and leftover cookout materials, barbecue materials. So that got cleaned up, but it was enough for a report that needed to be taken. So a criminal damage to property report was taken because I want to say there was an estimated damage of over $400 that is going to have to be.
At the park shelter or at
The park shelter and the park itself. So the cleanup, probably from maintenance, Public Works had to probably go over there. According to some of the photos, I would have guessed that Public Works probably had to make a round through there to clean up, so. We recently had our body-worn cameras implemented, full capacity. So all of our officers and command staff are now wearing body-worn cameras. And we've had quite a few incidents since the time being of them being implemented and put into service. So that's been beneficial for the police department side and the city side of things. A couple major incidents, one that made the media with a shooting on 11th Avenue was domestic that turned into a shooting. We apprehended the suspect, and the victim was transported to a nearby hospital, and we had the BCA come in and process the scene for us, which anytime an agency is needing to call in the BCA for a scene to be processed, it's a major incident. So they came in and processed the scene for us. brought their crime scene team in and worked on the scene for 3 to 4 hours. But everything was captured on the body-worn camera, and thank goodness we had them. So things are working out quite well and transitioning quite well on the police department side. Just needing to do some restructuring and get a grasp on things as the acting chief, and it's been an exciting role.
Is your desk a lot cleaner than Tom's?
It's a little bit cleaner. You
Good.
can actually see the desk. But it's accumulating paperwork as each day goes by, so I can see how after 32 years it got to where it was with Mr. Loth. So does anybody have any questions for me at all?
Can you speak a little bit to the restructuring, like what you mean by that?
Yeah, so right now we have 14 officers that are able to patrol. We have two full-duty sergeants and one acting sergeant, Sergeant Betts. Once I moved into acting chief, he had moved into acting sergeant. So transitioning Sergeant Betts from a patrol role, getting him trained in, getting our short-staffed patrol unit where they need to be. Right now, we're operating on probably 2 to 3 officers on a shift, and needing the assistance of surrounding agencies. So with the restructuring is what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what can we do to better our scheduling, better our supervision. And right now, having the body-worn cameras is great because we have shifts where our patrol officers have an officer in charge with, meaning it's an officer in charge with somebody with more than a couple years of experience on. Typically, our overnight shift right now is with the newer officers. So our veteran officers are working more of the day shifts. So the restructuring it's a challenge because we got to look at our budget, and we got 4 new squads that are being worked on, and at some point in time here in the next few months will be put into place. They have a final step where they're going to need to go over to a company called EATI, which does all of our computer works for the squads, and that could take a month or 2 before they're finally put into place.
Do they all go at once?
They used to. EATI has acquired the St. Paul PD as one of their accounts, which kind of now pushes everyone else to the back burner. So we have to wait patiently in line for our turn. And typically it would have been, all the squads would have got done, but now it's going to be probably one at a time. And that one at a time could take, one squad alone over there getting fixed up could take a couple months. So before we have all of our squads fully in place and at full capacity, it could be, 2022 before we have all that said and done. We do have a squad down in the garage, so you guys are more than welcome to go down there and take a peek at it. It's got the new decals on it, and it's got the manufacturer set up right now, but it still looks pretty cool and looks exciting. So if you get a chance, you can go down to the garage there, and I'll let you in and show you. So with the restructuring, right now our main concern is getting our staffing levels up to where they need to be and bringing some of our overtime down. So our other challenges are we have the body-worn cameras in place, which took some time, but now we have the new tasers that are going to be.
You got them already?
Tasers in. So we have to figure out how we're going to get a couple of our patrol officers over to a training, which could take several days, and get them over and trained in. And once they're trained in, what they do is they come back over and they train everyone else. So we train the trainer, and not only that, but then we end up with two officers that know how to train on the new sevens. So another challenge there, but yeah. So it'll keep us busy for the next couple months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm hearing also that overtime is maybe a concern given staff levels. Are there any thoughts in how you're processing needing more staff? How many more staff are you anticipating? And
It's a good topic right now.
It's a very good topic. Yep, and it's a very good question. So, Lisa, there's two types of hiring process that we could consider. We can consider what's called a lateral process, and basically that is recruiting veteran officers or officers from other agencies that are experienced. Maybe some officers are laid off right now or sitting out there post-license, but have experience. The lateral process is more of an expedited process and takes less time to get an officer on the streets. Safely, of course, through a training process that we have developed and implemented in our field training program. We also have the traditional process, which recruits folks from school, right out of school, or folks that are experienced. So you have a mix, kind of a hybrid of both. But that process could take, before you have the 30 days of posting the job to the time they're actually on the street in uniform, could be 1 year, realistically, as opposed to lateral transfer could be 2 to 3 months. So quite different in time-wise. So getting our staff right now up to where we need to be, it would be nice to consider having 2 lateral officers start out and 2 traditional officers on the back end. So by mid-2022, we ultimately have 4 officers back in the loop, helping our schedule.
Because right now you have quite a few that are out for paternity leave and
Yeah,
medical, and
yeah,
so they're down quite a bit.
yeah. It seems like 2021 folks were either getting a dog or having kids.
Because overtime right now, there is a lot of overtime being
There is
used,
a
and I
lot
think
of,
we're working
yeah.
with finance right
You're
now.
absolutely right, Mayor. There's a lot of overtime. If I may, to give you an example, one of our sergeants in the last couple months, in a 2-week spread, had 56 hours of overtime, which is
A lot.
Yeah. So.
can you speak to the nature of what types of calls you are receiving? The police chief was giving us reports, and
Yeah,
obviously he was
absolutely.
transitioning. So.
Absolutely.
Being the new guy, you're really gonna give us a loot.
Yeah, in the last month, we've seen in a lot of it. See how you may, but in my eyes, in my experience, it seems like when the weather changes, it changes the type of calls. Just like if there's a full moon, we know it's going to be a weird night. But in the last month to 2 months, we've seen an increase in domestics. We've seen an increase in persons in crisis. And those persons in crisis vary in ages, from 10 years old all the way up to, 80 years old. It's just across the board of what kind of persons in crisis we're dealing with and what kind of resources that we've had to reach out to, i.e., child protection, Children's Hospital, Tubman Family. It's been extensive. We've seen a lot of vehicles flee from police. not only in our city, but surrounding cities that end up coming through our city, and either we're assisting or they're assisting us. So, and those typically stem from just a simple, I hate to use the word simple, but simple traffic stop, or some you may call routine traffic stop. Just attempting to pull someone over because they have expired registration or an out headlight, and there they go, they take off. Just pulled over and would have got a ticket for expired registration and end up getting in a flee. So we've seen a lot of folks fleeing in their cars on traffic stops. But the two top categories that I've seen rise are the domestics and persons in crisis calls.
And do you mean like mental health crises?
Yep.
Okay. And, because I've heard that the Maplewood Police have been working with the Ramsey County Mental Health Crisis, and I was just wondering, would that be helpful and complementary to the police department, especially if that's something we're seeing a lot of?
Absolutely.
And maybe in terms of time, may be able to implement a little bit sooner than that year or what have you, or maybe.
I think that's a pilot program for Ramsey County
Yep.
Social Services. They're applied for a grant. Maplewood applied for the grant and
Yeah.
received a social worker. And I think we're possibly could be able to do the same thing, or at least use those resources.
Yep.
Maybe not on a full-time basis, but on a part-time basis.
Yeah, we're actually considering looking into having one or two of our officers take a training on grant writing, so they can start seeking out grants for us, for our city in, specifically.
Good, good.
Police Department.
Well, how you fitting in? Are you feeling comfortable being the
Yeah.
interim? And
Yeah, it's, the boys and girls have adapted well. The morale is healthy, the work environment's healthy. It's been challenging, but I guess you never know if you're a fit until you get into the spot and you're put to the test, so.
And we thank you and thank Brian too. I mean, both
Yeah, Brian's
fitting in the interim, and all the department heads and you guys are all working together, and it's been very positive.
Yeah, I think Brian and Jenny I've talked to more than I have Gina and Kristen, who are police admin.
That's good, good. Any other questions? Go ahead.
CSO officers, I think at one point, were we up to 4? Do we have 4, or was it 3 a few years ago, and then we were down to none, but now we have 1? Can you just briefly discuss your opinion on how that impacts the department?
Yeah, Scott is referring to our community service officer, and our community service officer has the capacity to take calls such as low-level medicals, responding with the assistance of Lakeville Medical and the fire department, also handling the animal complaints. And what that does is it really ties up, or it really frees up our officers, especially when we have only 2 on for a shift, and having to be taken out of service, to go chase down a dog and then pick up the dog and then transport the dog up to Otter Lake. That could take an hour or 2, and then have to write a report if there's a dog bite on top of it, or licensing has to be taken care of, and follow-up has to be done with the city council. So having a community service officer is very beneficial in the sense of right now, because we're short-staffed. If we had 18 officers on the street, having a CSO would be beneficial for the CSO themselves, because he or she is probably pursuing law enforcement. So to have that experience, that's typically what they're doing in their role, in their position. But we don't have that. And so right now, having a community service officer for our city is beneficial not only to the officers, but to the city itself. Because we end up, if we ended up having to have officers hold over for, animal complaints, or because they had to transport somebody up to Otter Lake, that's overtime that accumulates over time, and we just can't afford that. So it's very beneficial having the community service officer. And you're right, we do have one. I think in my 10 years here, I don't know if we ever got up to 4, Scott. Maybe 2?
We had 2. Okay.
Maybe 2?
At one point, there were 3, but maybe it was because one was
Getting trained or
trained in
something,
and
yeah.
getting hired on.
Yep. But yeah, I think the most we've had since I've been here is 2, and that was quite nice for the officers. So, and it's summertime, so we see the animal complaints rise in the summertime. But even the medical calls, it's good experience for them to be out taking the reports and interacting with the community. So,
Any other questions for Ray?
My only one is just the lack of a CSO. Is that a budgetary constraint? Is that?
that's a good question. I would think it would be.
I think it was at
I
one
think it
point,
would
it was a
be.
budgetary.
Because at the time that we cut the second CSO was a time that we also had not considered, we didn't move forward with our hiring process for patrol officers. So I think the 2 and 2 went hand in hand as far as budget goes.
So I would think some of the reduction in overtime pay would help fund a large percentage of that position.
Absolutely. And, we could rack up the numbers for 2021 alone, and being that most of our overtime, I can tell you, has come from a sergeant's position as opposed to patrol position, which are
Which is
two
higher.
different types of pay.
Right.
So.
Okay. Thank you. I put you on the spot.
No,
I
no
do
worries.
appreciate
Thank
you
you. I'm glad I got
talking to the council, because we all want to hear what's kind of going on in the community, and you're kind of out there and understand what's going on. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, my door's always open.
All right.
Ray answers his phone.
I do, yes, on the weekends even.
On weekends even.
I have one last
Oh,
question.
oh,
What's happening for August National Night Out with the
We are currently putting together a committee. Officer DeCory, who is our community relations officer, she loves, it's her expertise, putting all that stuff together. So she's going to be putting together a committee, and I can meet with her, and if you guys would like, we could come back to you with what we're going to have here. So I'm sure, I think all the departments are going to be doing the same.
good.
So.
That'd be great.
And that actually touched on another topic. Then we promise we'll let you go. We had a community meeting at Casey Lake Park a couple of weeks back here now, and one of the topics that was brought up was something done in St. Paul, Safe Summer Nights.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that program at
I've
all?
heard bits and pieces of it on LinkedIn. I see Chief Axel over there posting some stuff on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it sounds like it's different from, National Night Out. It's
Yeah.
another separate entity that St. Paul Police is doing. And that was brought up it's in my notes, but that was brought up in the community meeting, that it might be something to take a look at for North St. Paul. I don't
Yeah,
know enough about it and what it entails, but I just wanted to share that with you.
I appreciate that.
Since you're an
Yeah,
active listener right now.
I'd be more than happy to reach out to Chief Axel.
Good.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Very good. If there's nothing else, motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Moved by Councilmember Peterson, second by Councilmember Wong. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned. We got about 10 minutes. How's that, Carrie?